Scorpio, you pride yourself on seeing what others can't. You read between the lines, hear what's not being said, and smell a lie before it's even spoken. But this time, you missed it. This time, the venom didn't come from your enemies, it came from the one you loved. And you never saw it coming. You were busy protecting someone. You thought you were shielding them from the world. But the truth, you were shielding them from consequences. You made excuses for their shadows because you thought you could bring them into your darkness, and somehow, they'd feel safe enough to stop hiding. You thought you could love them through the poison. But instead, they fed on your silence. They used your loyalty as a cage, and when they were done, they walked away like you meant nothing. It wasn't a breakup. It was an ambush. You weren't just left behind. You were left bleeding with your own blade in your hand, realizing too late that the person you would have taken a bullet for was the one who loaded the gun. And Scorpio, let's be honest, you don't just get over something like that. You don't just wipe your tears and move on. You die. You dissect. You rewind every memory, every kiss, every promise. You relive the exact moment you started shrinking. You replay their voice in your head, trying to find the crack in the lie, but there's too many. And now you're wondering, how the hell did I not see it? Because you were too busy healing them. Too busy being the one who doesn't run when it gets hard. You gave more than you should have, stayed longer than you promised yourself, and loved harder than they ever deserved. And now you're sitting in the ruins of a future only you were building, trying to figure out where your power went. Here's where you gave it away. Slowly, in pieces, every time you apologize for needing honesty, every time you minimized your intuition to avoid an argument, every time you swallowed your rage to keep the peace, every time you let them talk you out of what you knew was real. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the version of you who let this happen. But here's the twist. Scorpio, you didn't lose them. You lost the version of yourself who thought you needed them. And that's not a tragedy. That's an exorcism. This isn't just a breakup. It's a reckoning. The universe didn't rip them out of your life to punish you. It was a rescue mission. Divine timing stepped in and yanked the mask off someone you were too loyal to see clearly. You weren't rejected. You were redirected. You weren't abandoned. You were protected. What felt like a betrayal was actually God saying, enough. I won't let you bleed for someone who celebrates your suffering. So now, Scorpio, it's time to burn the illusion to ash. You are rising not because you healed, but because the rage in your bones won't let you stay on the floor any longer. This is the part of your story where you stop asking why and start declaring never again. You don't need closure. You are the closure. And soon, they'll realize they lost someone who would have destroyed the world for them. But by then, you'll be too far away to care. Because this is only the beginning. Scorpio, there comes a night quiet. Too quiet when you pass by a mirror and catch a glimpse of yourself in the dark. And for a moment, you don't recognize who's looking back. You pose. You stare. You try to remember the last time you felt familiar in your own skin. And what looks back at you is not broken but transformed. And yet you whisper, who is this person I've become because love changed you? Not in the poetic way people write about, not in the healing way you once believed, but in a slow, venomous drip that twisted your instincts, numbed your edges, and rewired your reflexes. You, the one who once walked through fire with a straight spine, began tiptoeing around someone else's moods. You, the one who could cut through lies like a blade through silk, started second-guessing your every thought, your every truth. And now, under the weight of their absence, you are finally beginning to see the shape you bent yourself into, just to be loved by someone who feared the real you. It wasn't always this way. There was a time, not long ago, when you knew who you were fierce, focused, unshakable. The kind of person who didn't chase validation because your power was internal, your worth was non-negotiable. You didn't tolerate half-truths or slippery apologies. You didn't shrink to fit, and yet, somehow, piece by piece, the mirror shows the cost of what you thought was love. You remember the small changes first, how your laughter keyed, how your wardrobe changed, how you stopped talking about your dreams around them. Not because you no longer believed in them, but because you sensed they didn't. You remember how their eyes didn't light up when you shared your wins, how you started withholding joy to protect their ego. You became a softer version of yourself, not out of healing, but out of fear. Fear of being too much, fear of outshining, fear of causing discomfort just by being bright. And Scorpio, that was never you, but they made you doubt yourself. With sideways glances, with silent disapproval, with compliments that stung more than they soothed, you started questioning your tone, your passion, your fire. And in the mirror now, you see the evidence, the dimming, the erasure, the cautious expressions, the way your shoulders tilt inward, as if you've been bracing for an impact that never stopped coming. You don't remember when you started apologizing for your intensity, but the mirror does. You don't remember when you stopped looking people in the eyes, afraid they'd see your shame, but the mirror does. You don't remember when your power became a burden instead of a gift, but the mirror does. And now, as you stand before this reflection, and the truth sharpens in your chest, you weren't just loving them, you were trying to become someone they could love. And in doing so, you abandon yourself in 1,000 subtle ways. But here's the part that changes everything. Scorpio, you're waking up, not all at once, not with a scream or a shatter, but with a slow, sacred remembering. The mirror is no longer just a punishment, it's a portal. It's showing you not just who you became, but who you were before, and who you still are beneath the wreckage. The sharp eyes, the magnetic energy, the quiet knowing, it's all still there, just buried under layers of trying to be enough for someone who would never be satisfied, no matter how much of yourself you surrendered. And now that the silence has settled, now that their absence has cleared the fog, you can see more clearly than ever. You were not too much. You were too powerful to be controlled, and they feared that power, so they chipped away at it, hoping you'd forget where you came from. But they failed, because Scorpio always remembers, even in ruins. You remember who you are, especially in ruins. There's grief. Of course, you're grieving the version of yourself that waited too long, gave too much, stayed too quiet. You're grieving the future you were building with someone who only ever saw it as a convenience. But more than that, you're grieving the illusions, the belief that they were capable of growing, that they saw your soul, that they were ever truly beside you. And as that grief moves through your bloodstream like a second death, something else stirs, something ancient, something unkillable, something Scorpio. It's the fire coming back. It starts in your spine, then in your voice, then in your boundaries. You begin saying no. You begin taking up space again. You begin reclaiming your time, your thoughts, your desires. You begin writing again, dancing again, sleeping through the night, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer owns you. You stand in front of the mirror now and whisper, "I'm not ashamed anymore." And the mirror replies, "I know. I've been waiting for you." Scorpio, you didn't lose yourself. You were just temporarily hidden, buried under the weight of a love that was never really love. It was performance. It was transaction. It was survival. And now, you are done surviving. You are starting to live. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and close your eyes, don't mourn the person who walked away. Mourn the pieces of yourself you gave away trying to hold them. Then promise yourself you'll never trade your truth for temporary company again. Because this mirror, it's sacred. It showed you your pain, but now it's showing you your rebirth. And Scorpio, nothing is more dangerous than a heart that has learned how to heal without revenge. Scorpio, the goodbye didn't come with a scream, or a slammed door, or even a final confession. It came quietly, like smoke slipping under a door, like a whisper that lingers in a room long after someone has left. And at first, you missed it. You thought it was just another fight, another silence, another bruise that would heal if you gave it time, because you've survived worse. You've forgiven more, and you were willing to wait through storms just to keep the roof from caving in. But then one day you realized they were gone. Not physically, not even fully emotionally, but something had left. Something sacred, something that once tied your soul to theirs like an invisible thread. And no matter how tightly you clutched the rope, it had already been cut from the other end. You didn't know then what you know now, that the goodbye wasn't just an ending. It was a message. It was the closing of a portal. It was a final spell cast by the universe to end a cycle that you would have kept spinning until you bled out. And now, as the silence grows louder, you begin to hear what was hidden in that final absence. Because goodbye isn't always a word. Sometimes, it's an answer. It answered the question you refused to ask. Would they choose you if it cost them their comfort? It answered the question you buried deep. Would they fight for you the way you fought for them? And most painfully, it answered the question you couldn't bear to voice. Did they ever really see you? Or were they just reflecting their own needs into your devotion, Scorpio? The message was never in what they said. It was in what they avoided, in what they couldn't give, in what they withheld while telling you they loved you, in the way they needed you strong, but never celebrated your strength, in how they admired your fire until it burned too close to the parts of themselves they kept hidden. The message was in every moment you compromised, and they didn't notice, in every boundary you bent, and they called it love. In every apology you gave for things that were never your fault, you weren't just loving them, you were translating them, excusing them, carrying them, and they called that partnership, but it was never equal. You were the anchor and the sail, the storm and the shelter. And they just held the wheel loosely while you steered the whole ship through waves they never acknowledged. The goodbye was the final punctuation to a sentence you kept rewriting, and now, with space, you finally see that every I love you was shadowed by an unspoken but not like that love that asked you to shrink, to soften, to second guess, to submit, love that came with requirements. Don't speak too loud. Don't shine too bright. Don't ask for too much. But Scorpio, you were never too much. You were just too real for someone who built their world on illusion. And the message in the goodbye was this: you were never the one who needed to change. The grief still lingers. You still wake up some mornings reaching for a ghost. You still hear a song and feel your throat close. You still catch yourself replaying their last look, trying to decode whether they felt anything at all. But somewhere, underneath the ache, another voice is rising. Your voice, the one you silenced to keep the peace, the one that used to tell you when something felt wrong, before you trained it to whisper. And now, that voice says, this ending was the gift you didn't know you needed. Because had they stayed, you would have kept bending, kept burning your instincts for the illusion of connection, kept betraying your own clarity just to keep from being alone. But you're not alone now. You are with yourself. And maybe that's the message that hurts the most, that you had to lose them to come back to you. Scorpio, you are ruled by death and transformation. You don't just move on, you rise. And in this goodbye, the universe buried something deep in the soil of your soul. A leçon, a spell, a sacred contract that says, never again will you give yourself to someone who treats your love like a liability. The goodbye also held a prophecy not just of what would leave, but of what would arrive. Something is coming. Someone is coming. Not just anyone, but a mirror, a match, a partner who will see your fire and feed it instead of fearing it. But first, the lesson had to be learned. First, the message had to be read. And now that you've heard it, felt it, wept over it, you can finally turn the page. You don't need vengeance. You don't need closure from them. Because the message was never about them. It was about you. Your pattern, your self-worth, your tendency to stay too long in places that no longer feed you. And now that you've understood it, now that you've embodied the pain without becoming it, now that you've cried until the ache became wisdom, Scorpio, the cycle is broken. And in the quiet after the goodbye, you finally hear the sound of your own healing. It's in the steadiness of your breath. It's in the small smile you catch in the mirror. It's in the peace that returns when you realize you no longer want them back. You don't want someone who made you question your magic. You want someone who guards it like gold. So tonight, if the goodbye still stings, if the echo of what was still haunts the edges of your thoughts, let it speak. Let it finish its sentence. Let the message reach your core. And then, gently, lovingly, let it go. Because the next chapter isn't just waiting for you. It's been calling your name all along. Scorpio, people often mistake your silence for surrender, but they never understand that your stillness is the most dangerous thing about you. They don't realize that behind your quiet nods and your lowered eyes, a storm is brewing. A fire is roaring in a language no one else can hear. A sacred rage that doesn't scream, but seethes in the marrow of your bones. And the silence you kept was never weakness, it was survival. It was strategy. It was the breath before the explosion. Because you knew, even when you told yourself you didn't, even when you smiled at their excuses, forgave their omissions, explained away the absence of effort, you knew, in the shadows of your heart, in the sharp corners of your intuition, you felt the fracture long before it split the ground open. But you stayed silent, not because you didn't care, but because you cared so much, too much, with a kind of loyalty that burns hotter than fire and deeper than blood. You watched them pull away, slowly, like dusk turning to night. And instead of asking them to stay, you folded your grief into quiet rituals. You brewed coffee for one instead of two. You stopped waiting for their message. You turned off your phone but left your heart wide open because you hoped that by becoming smaller, softer, easier, they would come closer. But they didn't. And each time they didn't show up, your silence grew heavier, like bricks stacked behind your ribs, like screams trapped in amber. But silence is not emptiness. Scorpio, not for you. Your silence is volcanic, and inside, the fire was building, not a fire of anger, not yet, but the fire of recognition, the fire of seeing what you never wanted to see, the fire of knowing this person would never meet you at the depth you craved, that they were not listening, that they were never coming back, not really, that they couldn't love you without conditions, that they didn't want the version of you that was raw, real, powerful. They wanted the edited version, the dimmed light, the obedient flame. And so you went quiet. You stopped explaining. You stopped begging. You let the silence wrap around you like a second skin. Because you knew there was no point shouting across a canyon to someone who was never going to build a bridge. But still, the fire burned. It burned through the nights you cried without making a sound. It burned when they posted something as if nothing had changed. While your world had collapsed in silence, it burned when friends asked if you were okay and you smiled. Because how could you explain that your soul had become a battleground between memory and reality? It burned when you remembered how you used to laugh, how you used to feel safe, how you used to trust, and yet, Scorpio, you didn't let the fire consume you because there is something in you that refuses to die. You've walked through emotional graveyards before. You've buried parts of yourself in relationships that demanded your silence. You've been underestimated, dismissed, ghosted, betrayed, and every time they thought you would break. But you don't break. You alchemize. You turn pain into protection. You turn loss into legend. And this time, this burn will be no different. Because behind the silence was not only pain, but truth. And truth, Scorpio, is your resurrection. The truth that says I saw everything, and I stayed too long anyway. The truth that says my silence wasn't for them, it was for me. Because I needed time to gather my pieces in private. The truth that says I could have destroyed them with what I know, but I chose to heal instead. Because that's the part they never see. The discipline it takes not to expose their lies, not to respond to their provocations, not to tear the mask off in front of everyone. You had the power. You always had the power, but you chose silence. And in doing so, you chose your evolution over their validation. And now, as the flames calm into embers, as your body remembers peace again, as your spirit begins to breathe without bracing, what remains is not just a lesson, but a rebirth. You are not bitter. You are burned clean. You are not hardened. You are sharpened. You are not afraid. You are awake. Because your silence has done its work. It has spoken the things that words never could. It has preserved your dignity when nothing else could. It has protected your healing in the sacred darkness only Scorpio understands. So tonight, when the memories flicker like old film reels in your mind, let them pass. Don't clutch them. Don't fight them. Let them burn. And let what survives be yours. Let your silence carry the last word, because it already has. Scorpio, close your eyes now, not to escape, not to forget, but to return to yourself, to the stillness you've earned, to the voice that was buried beneath their noise, to the pulse that beats like a war drum behind your ribs. Steady, answent, unrelenting, even on nights you swore your heart would never recover. Because it has, because you have, because you're here, breathing, softer and stronger all at once. And that is the paradox only someone who has walked through betrayal and back can truly understand. You thought this would destroy you? You thought the silence would swallow you whole, that the goodbye would echo forever, that the loss would be the end of you, but Scorpio, what it ended was the illusion, and the strength that rose in its place was never new. It was always yours. It had just been waiting beneath the weight of your sacrifice, beneath the version of yourself you distorted to be digestible, beneath the dreams you downsized to keep someone from feeling small beside you. You were never too much. You were always too honest for their performance, too deep for their surface, too loyal for their games. And now that you've stopped trying to fit where you don't belong, the air is clearer. The silence is kinder. Your own company. No longer punishment. But promise, there is a sacred kind of strength in choosing not to explain yourself. In watching someone walk away and not chasing, in feeling the ache and still saying, I will not lower my standards just to feel loved for a moment. That kind of strength doesn't shout. It hums. It hums in the rituals you've created to survive the tea at midnight. The playlists that understand your moods better than people ever did. The journals filled with thoughts you were too wise to say aloud. The walks you take alone because solitude feels safer than companionship that costs your soul. It hums in your eyes older now. Sharper. Softer too. And it hums in your heart, which still beats with love. Not in spite of the betrayal, But because of it, because you chose not to let bitterness be the closing chapter, because you chose to forgive yourself before anyone else, because you chose to stay tender in a world that tried to harden you. Scorpio, this strength didn't come from victory. It came from loss. It came from disappointment. It came from showing up to a life you no longer recognized and deciding to rebuild it anyway. It came from staring into the mirror and telling the truth you didn't want to say. I gave too much. I waited too long. I silenced too often. But no more. And from that truth, you began again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. With the slow courage of someone who no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy, with the kind of patience that knows real connection does not require shrinking, with the kind of dignity that says, if I must walk alone to protect my peace, then so be it. Because now you know peace is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to stay in places that prolong it. And love is not a cage you earn your way out of. It is a garden where you both grow or not at all. So tonight, as your head touches the pillow and the world fades to black, let this truth settle into your bones. You were never broken. You were becoming. This was the shedding, the molting, the burning down of everything that kept you dim, and in the ash, in the silence, in the echo of their leaving, you didn't just survive. You found the strength you didn't know was yours. And from now on, every love that comes must meet you here. Not in your woundedness, but in your wholeness, not in your silence, but in your song, not in the version of you they hope to tame, but in the flame you've become. Sleep now. Scorpio, the war is over. You won.